everyone, I'm Jo Holden. I'm an active conduit for Source Intelligence and I'm here to help the collective. So I've quite a lot of information I need to share. It's going to take a fair few sessions, which I will be laying out sequentially as guided. It's taken me a long time to gather this information and it's been a journey. There's been a lot of ups and downs to it, a lot of unexpected twists and turns, all part of the reawakening process, which I know there are many other souls on this planet at this time going through. So part of the content I'm going to be delivering is going to be talking about that, both from the overview in terms of the process that's playing out, and there are universal themes in that. What I would talk about as aims, activations, initiations, mastery, different levels of and different areas of, and ultimately success, sovereignty, being the S there. So I'll talk about the process in some of the sessions, and I'll also talk about some of my own personal experiences that, as and where guided, I think may be helpful to other people in terms of some of the insights I've gained, and where it relates to more of the challenges and obstacles and traps and illusions, various protection mechanisms and means of asserting self spiritually when under attack from various influences, groups, organisations, and also, you know, non-physically speaking, there are different levels and layers to this. So one of the things that is most important in terms of the content I'm going to be delivering, at least, you know, for me, it's been a big part of me being able to really wrap my head around certain things that are happening, certain esoteric sort of experiences, has been understanding how reality functions and the purpose of how and why we seem to have come to have these dualing systems, where there's the light, organic, natural, of source, reflections of source sort of system, within which, you know, the overarching operating system is multiversal, but within which there's many worlds and realms across various densities within many different dimensions, and universally it typically we attribute that to, in our current incarnation, in whatever form we currently take, the larger construct connected to that. So we have our world, and then our world is part of, you know, a greater system, and normally we would refer to that as the universal system. So multiversal is all of those different constructs, interconnected, interactive, intercommunicative, and then universally is the one that's more connected to our present incarnation and form. So we'll be talking about that when we talk about reality as a simulation. There's many different components to this that I'll be laying out. This is an overview of a scheme of work that I put together last year. It's one of several iterations of the content that I've been working on pulling together for a long time. It keeps growing, it keeps expanding, it keeps morphing and changing into new and different avenues as a result of new and different experiences I've been having. Again, not all been straightforward and fun. Sometimes it's felt like, you know, I'm sort of treading water. It feels like I'm getting nowhere despite doing a whole lot of work, and that's one of the things I want to talk about, because it is part of the reawakening process. It is an aspect of, a reflection of changes that are taking place on a planetary sort of scale, but it's affecting each and every one of us personally in different ways. Strategies and solutions, when we get to the point where I've laid out how things are functioning, what will emerge from those explanations and the evidence I'm going to provide and the resources I'm going to signpost people to, and once I've laid out the, let's say, foundations of how things are functioning, the strategies and solutions tend to emerge as a how do we then, in light of having a truer understanding, greater clarity, and standing stronger in the truth of who and what we are, how do we disentangle from what are currently operating as harmful false systems on this planet? And as I've already mentioned, how do we overcome the challenges that comes with that, the obstacles? And if we can avoid the traps, the illusions, that would be great. And by illusions I mean delusions, illusions, a lot of false information out there, obviously, a lot of disinformation and misinformation, and the whole point is to try and keep people as confused as possible, which brings me to a caution. I'm highlighting Kim Goguen specifically because personally that's one of the traps I fell into. I had been following Kim's content from around late 2020, early 2021. I probably got a little bit more engrossed in it. It's a long story and there's a lot to unpack, so I will do like a mini series where I go into more detail and provide more explanation and evidence and signpost to corresponding sort of information connected to some of what I'm about to say. But in the last 15 months, so February 2024, I sent the first few sessions and an overview of this scheme of work for the reality as a simulation sort of component of the content I was going to be delivering. At the time, I was under the misunderstanding that I thought there was a lot of truth in what Kim was saying, and I thought there were points where the content I was creating would be a good fit, very complementary, let's say, to what Kim puts out there as her new media system, and I wanted to be helpful. It came just after Kim had split from certain team members. For anybody that's not familiar with Kim Goguen, honestly I would say don't waste your time. But she has claimed to be operating as an intermediary for higher sort of forces, powers that assisting with change on this planet, and she claims to have a quantum system that is connected into the financial system and everything from military to intelligence agencies to law and legal stuff and political systems and all of that, and she has claimed that her role is to act as a representative for the light and to support and encourage and lead humanity to a golden age, as she calls it. And I know when I say it like that, for anybody that's not familiar with her content will probably scoff at the thought of anyone with any sense sort of falling for that. But I, having had many what you might call weird and woo experiences for many years now, could see the possibility, the potential for such a system as she claims to be operating to exist, when you understand how the overarching operating system of reality actually functions, to the degree that I can explain it. I'm not saying I've got all the answers, that would be false of me to claim, but having investigated for many years as a result of having had an out-of-body experience back in 2011, and then several other out-of-body experiences and altered states of consciousness sort of happen. It causes you to ask questions and to investigate certain aspects of how this reality does operate. So I've been putting, there's more to add to this, in fairness, when we get into the actual sessions, but as an overview, I've been investigating this stuff for a long time. So I could see how and why certain claims that she was making were possible, and I'll be honest, I found it comforting to know that, one, I weren't the only one having these weird woo-woo experiences. Two, there was someone and other people, she claims to be working with other people in certain operations that she claims to be running. I found it comforting to know that, one, I wasn't going crazy, and two, change was happening on a higher level. And so seeing myself very much at grassroots in terms of my influence and impact and the work I was doing, what seemed very important to me was that there was a concerted effort to bridge the gap between what we were experiencing, and when I say we, I mean those of us going through that awakening process on an everyday sort of level and basis, bridge that gap between what was happening at the higher levels and the lower levels. And I felt like there was some disjoint there in terms of, each experience not necessarily fully integrating and coming together and creating a more unified effort, a more cohesive effort to actually affect change on the planet. So that was why I reached out in February 2024, offered insight to what it was I was putting together, thinking it could be helpful for other people, maybe just coming to know about Kim's content, or who were perhaps had been following along but maybe hadn't had the same amount of time to do research into various topics and grasp certain aspects of things Kim were talking about. I thought if there was someone that could, offer a more like a breakdown of, so when Kim's talking about this, this is how it relates to us on a more everyday basis. So I sent that over. What's happened since then is Kim has utilised some of that content and basically just, passed it off as her own, which in and of itself is, it's not really a big deal. I now know that this is something that Kim is known for doing. I didn't realise this at the time, but when I look back, I have seen comments and there's been red flags, but I've not really, I hadn't fully sort of attended to that, let's say. You can have confirmation bias, and if someone's presenting themselves as something that is everything you would want to support and encourage and invest in, then you tend to easily overlook other people's criticism of that person. So I'd done that, I'd ignored that, and then saw firsthand that yes, in fact she does very convincingly talk about things that other people have shared with her and pass it off as her own experience or her own insight or her own guidance from source. And so that was disappointing, because I was like, okay, that's dishonest, but no real harm done. It was only the first few sessions. There's these topics, there's lots of people talking about them, there's lots to be said about them. We've each got our unique perspective. It's a bit annoying if someone takes yours and pretends it's theirs, but okay. So I was going to be quite happy to just move on from that. I then saw her using some of the content dishonestly in a an inverted sort of way, distorting the information, misinforming people with it, misusing it. So that I did have a bit more of a problem with, because the whole point of the work that I've been doing and what my guidance is, what my role is to bring greater clarity and strength to the collective. And you know, when information you've shared is then misrepresented, it's the opposite of the effect I was hoping for. So so by that point, obviously, part of me was very much, okay, this is not someone I want to promote, or, you know, I'd been recommending her resources to people up to that point. So I was feeling a little bit embarrassed, and as you would. So I'm like, okay, gotta backtrack. This is why I'm starting the programme again, because, you know, I don't want people to have the confusion of me initially supporting Kim and recommending Kim, which is what I did, you know, in those original recordings that I did last year. In addition, I'll put the links for those sessions if anybody wants to look at them, because there's some useful information in there. It's not like I'm just talking about Kim the whole time. There is content, you know, that is of much more significance. But at the time, you'll hear me reference, I don't go into great detail about it, but I do talk about the fact that one of the learning curves that I've had in the past few years has been finding myself on the wrong side of a coven. That's not a coven I was ever personally involved in. I've never practiced, you know, consciously, deliberately, any system of magic. I've studied a whole lot around energetics, and when you really break it down, you know, it is magic essentially is the manipulation of energy. But I hadn't, up to you know, the last couple of years, really had any awareness of just how prevalent and how pervasive the use of magical systems, let's say, you know, there's different methodologies, there's different methods within those methodologies. So your methodologies being your frameworks, being your overarching approach, let's say, and then your methods being the tools and techniques that you use specifically for specific effects. I hadn't realised how many various orders and societies there were that were teaching this stuff and practicing this stuff. I knew there was high level, you know, quote unquote, black magic or dark magic or baneful magic, or, you know, whatever label you want to give it. It's not something I've ever had an interest in or felt the need to investigate, which is ironic now, because I found myself on the wrong side of a coven as a result of someone I'd had a personal involvement with. Now, we're learning as we go, so I think, if I'm really honest, looking back over this past few years, I think what's happening is targeting. I think, you know, those of us who are still in that innocent, naive state of expecting the vast majority of people out there to be good souls, organic souls, you know, mean well, and I do still think in terms of, you know, percentile that is the case, but I was naive to the fact that there are many different arms, let's say, to various. So if you've got high level sort of control systems that are represented through certain agencies and certain institutions and organisations, what has been sort of filtered down is the memo's gone out, let's say, to target more specifically people that are sharing information unsuspectingly, as many of us do online. It could be on your social media, could be on your work profiles, could be you know, dating sites, could be groups that you join, maybe online courses, that kind of stuff. I'm using these as examples because these are all ways that I now know my information got noticed. So where people are sharing information that fits certain soul identifications or personality types, might be a more, you know, 3D in the physical material reality, that side of it, which you know, if you're an authentic person, the two should correspond. Your personality type should reflect you know, your organic source code in soul transmission. And so I now know that there are many different, let's say, nets out there to catch and capture in various ways. Certain types of personalities who are very much about positive change and, you know, freedom for the masses and fairness for the masses, and there's many different attributes you could, you know, assign to those personality types, but very much about, you know, advocate for justice and freedom and fairness, very much about wanting to see a restoration for the planet and for the souls on the planet back to a more organic state of being, multi-unity, balance. So what had happened was I'd already found myself identified by a certain group, one person in particular who I'd been personally involved with. Events happened, he and I, as far as I was concerned, went our separate ways, and I'd been pretty heavily attacked after that, energetically, psychically, spiritually, to the extent that it brought it onto my radar. I became aware that that was happening, and so I started to do more research and develop skills to, you know, cleanse and clear and protect, and all of that. Had pretty much come out the other side of the worst of the adverse effects that I'd experienced at the time, and then decided to get, you know, focused on the path, get on track with what I knew I was here to do, instead of getting distracted with romances and other aspects of life. So that is what I've done, and put the content together, sent that over to Kim, and pretty quickly after that, I'm talking within days of doing so, started to receive some really strong, very intense attacks, and initially my thought was, somehow, some way has that other group, this other coven, got wind of what I'm doing? Is there some attempt to stop me doing this now? There was a different flavour to it. You know, all energy has signatures, just like in the physical we do. You know, we have unique fingerprints and DNA and voices and walks and, you know, retinal scans, and we have our identifying factors, right? So, and energetically so is true. So I knew there were some differences, but I thought perhaps they'd brought in other practitioners, or initially, but I quickly got clear enough to realise that it was connected to this, and I knew the content couldn't have been seen online by anybody else, because I'd recorded the videos, but I'd kept them unlisted and then not shared the links with anyone else. Now I knew that the UNN team and Kim had viewed them, because there's references not to my content as it being mine, but there's utilisation of aspects of my content in certain situation reports that Kim gave, and the team were also sharing links to resources that I'd referenced and recommended, and I could see from the views, given that there were only me and them that had the links, I knew, you know, people had viewed it, so I knew that like they had seen it, but I didn't know, I couldn't fathom at the time as to why I would be receiving attacks for sending that content over. You know, it's all well and good if you don't want to associate with me, that's fine. If you don't want to tell the truth as to where you've got this content from, okay, if that's how you're going to be. I couldn't understand why I was on the receiving end of attacks from them as a result of that. So it's taken some time, asking for guidance, asking for clarity, doing more research, to realise that a lot of people who doubt or dispute Kim's claims will say she's just a scam artist, she's just a con woman, she's just, you know, it's a money making thing. I disagree. I don't think that's where it starts and ends. I don't think that does it justice. I think for a long time now, what I've now been shown and told, for a long time now, there's been knowledge by the powers that have been that the process that's playing out on the planet, it was known this was going to happen, and there'd been preparation done to ensure that as and when those of us who would identify as being here as insert label, you know, volunteer souls, earth angels, light workers, healers, teachers, all of that, those of us that have come with a purpose to participate in and contribute to bringing positive change to this planet, in preparation as a preventative measure from, you know, the other side, these resources, you know, the narratives that have been put out there, they haven't just been designed to cause the confusion and the depletion and the disempowerment in by inserting, programming the wrong information. That's part of it, but there's also been, by design, mechanisms put in place where many of the people involved in those programs are trained to ensure that they can attach various types of bindings and use energetic siphons, and so they're not just attacking people, they're taking soul source energy from those people, not only to deplete them, but as an energy source to power their presence, their persona, so they can maintain states of false light, sort of, you know, to present themselves as the very thing that they're preventing, which is genius on the one hand and so unbelievably nefarious on the other hand. So there's a lot of cloaking being done, there's a lot of, you know, glamour magic being used, there's a lot of energetic sort of siphoning, what's the word I'm looking for, like vampirism, parasitically sort of taken from, and any and every way, you know, where attention goes, energy flows. Even as passive observers, we are in some respects feeding energy to it, but it goes deeper than that. Some of these bindings, some of these seals and sigils and whatnot that are being used, and I've had to learn this more in a more detailed way in this past 14 months or so, because the magic I'd experienced being on the receiving end of prior, and that's been an ongoing thing as well, but as I've said, it's a very different vibe to what I've experienced from whoever, whatever it is that Kim acts as the face of, because I think it does run a lot deeper in the background as to, you know, what her role actually is, who it is that she's involved with. But there was a definite difference in intensity. The other stuff, really, you know, when they say everything happens for a reason, it's like that was sort of a basics level course for me. I had to learn so much to kind of get myself out of that situation, and then a lot of their efforts after that, I were pretty much covered in terms of protection. It wasn't that bad. I was still getting certain astral attacks that, you know, kept showing up as sort of lucid dreams, and I had to figure out how to kind of clear, cancel, delete any contracts or agreements that gave them that access. That was it took me a little bit longer to figure that out, but the stuff I've experienced on the other side of things with Kim that were on a different level. So I've had to spend the last it's been happening for the last 14-15 months, but by the time I figured out who it was and what they were doing and why they were doing it, and, you know, I would say probably this last 6-7 months intensively, I've been studying more around it and coming to understand more about the various systems that are used and how they use a combination of different types of spell work to create certain effects. So that's it's been interesting. It's not been fun. In some respects fascinating, but in others, you know, so disappointing is probably the best word I could use for it. But I know I'm not alone. Now, when I do the, let's call it mini series, I'm going to use a working title here, let's call it the Kimposter series. When we get into that, I will break down much more clearly, and I will also provide evidence that I'm not the only one who has highlighted that Kim is not who she says she is. Possibly I'm the only one who is going to go into more detail to explain who I now believe her to be and what I now believe she's doing. And of course, as I've already said, I don't believe for a second that she's working alone, but I think anybody and everybody who is giving her energy right now, what you may not realise is how much more is being taken as a result of that initial consent. You really are unlikely to be, otherwise you wouldn't be choosing to do it, unaware of just what else is attached to that. Now I understand there's probably going to be some backlash, there's probably going to be a few people that don't like what I'm saying and disagree with what I'm saying, and Kim is very good, I have noticed, at flipping the narrative, and I've noticed, not that I'm listening to her content anymore, but I am still a member of certain groups on Telegram more specifically, who are sharing different things that Kim's been talking about. And not only have I seen that she's continued to, you know, use the, let's say, content that I sent as inspiration, let's say, for her storylines, her narratives that she's been putting out there, but I have noticed as well that there are resources, things I've been listening to, things I've been looking at, things I've been researching that Kim is also drawing from, which when I do the mini series I'll show you just how much of a coincidence it is certain things I've either paid for as in downloaded, or books I've bought, or podcasts I've been listening to. It's almost like I'm being surveilled, I would say. I'll show you the dates in terms of when I've accessed certain things or purchased certain things, or from my watch history when I've listened to certain things, and then within a few days just after, or sometimes a couple of weeks just after, the exact same sort of theme or idea, or sort of whatever type of information it is, it's found its way into Kim's content, which is weird. Nothing surprises me at this point. So there's that, but I've also seen that she has been sharing with people that she's been under heavy attack, and it's like, okay, I suspect, I could be wrong, it's possibly not the whole sort of cause of these attacks that you are receiving, but I know I've definitely been returning a lot to sender, so possibly those attacks are your own energy coming back at you. When you're involved with the deep state, as they are referred to, I would imagine there probably is a lot of negative energy that gets sent left, right and centre amongst those various factions. So possibly some of it is that as well, but that's what when you decide to get mixed up in that stuff, that's what you would expect, I guess. Those of us that have incarnated into circumstances and conditions where we have had to awaken in a more organic fashion and follow our inner and higher guidance to certain types of information, what we haven't had is the benefit of being born into the networks of people that would be connected to the more occulted knowledge, right? So many of us wouldn't have been brought up around the types and uses of magic, wouldn't have been in the know about certain traditions and aspects of history, and we've had to figure and find this stuff out ourselves, and often that's been experiential learning, because a lot of the stuff I've ended up looking into I would never have looked into had I not been confronted with some situation, person, place, thing that brought to my attention that I had no idea this was an aspect of reality. So I think on the one hand you can say ignorance is bliss, and for a lot of people they'd rather not know about it, and I get that, I understand that. On the other hand, if you find yourself following a path whereby you are going to come across these people and you've got no prior skills, knowledge, training, that can be very unsettling. Speaking from experience, it has been very unsettling to have to realise and recognise that there are threats I didn't even know I needed to look out for. I was naively innocent, let's say, but also overly optimistic as to how easy I thought it was going to be to bring empowering information to the masses, and we've got all these new tools and platforms, and how great. And now I feel very much like what were I thinking? Why did I ever think that were a good idea? Thing is, I've got an agreement with higher self, with source, and there's no backing out apparently. I have to continue on this path because there's a reason I've been learning what I've been learning, and I've gained the insights that I've gained. So I don't say any of what I've just said with any deliberate intent to upset anyone or scare anyone. Not trying to be a fearmongerer. I will qualify everything that I've said in sessions. It'll be easier once I start with the framework of how reality functions, it's much easier then to pinpoint as we look at, you know, the planes of existence and how they express as the various densities of which we've each and all got access to, any and all of them. Looking at, you know, how the different levels and layers of self as the planes of existence can be affected, can be targeted, and then what the output from that is in terms of what that expresses in terms of densities, and the programs that run dominantly on each of those densities. It then becomes much easier to understand how certain types of rituals and certain types of spell work and whatnot, how they actually create the effects that they do, and how we can identify it, and also strategies and solutions, how we can clear, cleanse, block, stop, return, you know, whatever is most appropriate based on guidance and based on circumstance. So there's nothing in any of what I'm talking about that I feel like I would want people to feel panicked by, but and Kim obviously is not the only one out there who is acting as a an attraction point, let's say, for these operations that are running, these programs that are running. I would say she's possibly one of the more successful ones, but again, that could be because of how much it's factored into and featured in the last few years of my life. Maybe in terms of popularity, there are people out there that other people have been following that I've no idea about. You know, I'm aware of like the Trump Qing, and you know, I've seen such as Russell J. Gold talking about the legal lawful stuff, and you know, quantum grammar, and I've seen stuff, but I've not engaged with it in the same way that I have with Kim's content. And you know, when I look back now, I realise that there were red flags galore, really, all the way back in sort of early 2022, based on the things I saw. I had a friend who was more actively involved with what was at the time the Global Health and Wellness Consortium, and she shared some stuff with me that you know, were big red flags. But if I'm honest, what I'd done at the time was, in my mind, because I really wanted to trust and believe in Kim, I'd sort of associated those wrongdoings with the person who was heading up the Global Health and Wellness at the time was Lisa Thomas, and so I'd seen her as sort of some sort of plant or bad apple, or and that's why it was only after that split happened, when Kim and Lisa Thomas split, that's when I sent the content across to Kim. So yeah, my mistake. I had drawn erroneous conclusions. It was funny because my guidance were telling me 2024, last year, the truth would come to light about Kim, and in my preconceived notion of what I thought that meant, I had concluded from that this were going to be great news. There were going to be some sort of breakthrough, you know, the transfers would happen, something, you know, there'd be some proof. And the guidance was correct. I did find out the truth of who Kim is, but it wasn't in the way that I thought. It was literally the opposite. So we can be very intuitive and at the same time, you know, not necessarily discerning enough, you know. So my mistake. I will link those earlier videos so you can see, you know, what it was that I shared, and I will, when I've got enough of this content out there so that I can explain how things have worked, then I will give a more detailed explanation as to what I've been on the receiving end of for the last 14 months from Kim. So just be careful, you know, for those who, if you know you are a very loving, very giving, very compassionate sort of soul who is here to hopefully participate in positive change on this planet, and you have project ideas, and just please know that, you know, the double triple speak, I meant to talk a little bit more about that, but there's a lot of obfuscation and inversion that's happening. There's a lot of things that are being said that on the one hand it attracts us because a lot of what is being said is true. It's just not true in the context it's being delivered, and it's just not true of the people who are delivering it. So, you know, I will go into more detail about that when we get into this content. Some of what Kim claims, you'll see just from the explanations that I provide how false she has been in how she's presented it, because it's only once I became aware that she wasn't to be trusted that my own perception of certain things was then able to shift. You know, reality to us is how we perceive it. So because I was trusting and believing certain things that Kim was saying were true, I was operating on the basis of that being the case. So once I realised she wasn't telling the truth, I started asking new and different questions, and that led to insights, that things that had seemed let me see, how shall I put this, certain dots that I had, all the dots, I just hadn't connected them in a certain configuration, and they tell a very different story once I did. So that's going to show up in the first few sessions that I deliver, so you'll see what I mean as a demonstration and an explanation. Alright, so that's it for this intro, and, you know, slight caution, or maybe heavy caution on the who we are giving time, energy, resources, i.e. power to. Thank you to anybody that listens to this. I will be seeing you very soon, or at least speaking to you very soon when I do the next recording. Alright, thanks. Bye.